Hello and welcome to the HR People Pod, the CIPD's fortnightly podcast, bringing you the topical stories and expert insights from the world of work and the stories that most impact the profession. As usual, my name's David D'Souza. I'm Director of Profession at the CIPD, and we have trapped two HR directors in a room with us. We have
Jayne, Group Director of People and Culture for Kin, a later life living care home company.
And
Gareth, Neale, Head of HR for Crimson Hotels.
Fantastic. And it's both of you have been on before, haven't you?
Yes.
So you know exactly what to expect. So we can move through this at pace. So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you, because it may be useful for listeners, or it may be useful for you to reflect yourselves. What's the best piece of advice you've had through your career? So
first of all, thank you for having me back again. The best piece of advice I was given was very early on in my career when I first went into HR, and I was told to really, if I wanted to try and understand a situation and be a good communicator around it, is to really try and put myself in the other person's shoes. So early on in my career, that really looked like trying to understand an employee and their issues, so that I could try and support them. And now, many years later, it's about how I might prepare for a board presentation, thinking about what investors want to hear from me. So that piece of advice I've carried with me through sort of 30 years of working in HR, and it's evolved as I've gone along.
nice. Gareth?
That's too good. I'm sorry. I'm going to go.
I'm sorry, Gareth.
It's me.
Is that now the best advice you've heard?
That's
in
the
your
best.
career?
That's it. Thank you. We'll just skip this bit.
2 for 1. No, that was great. Yeah.
So thank you for having me back. Third time lucky, hopefully. So the best piece of advice I think that I've had is thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about actually how things affect not only the person, the individual, the business, but also thinking about how it frames with employment law, and what you have to do is try and think about how that balances between the three. Too often, I was thinking of one of the other three before I made a decision, and I think actually trying to take a step back and think what really is going on and how can I have the best input. I think is the most important piece of advice I've had.
Excellent. And have either of you had awful pieces of advice?
Yes. Yeah. Some terrible stuff in the past. Yes.
So I think my piece of advice would be really selective about where you get your advice from. I think there's always, particularly these days, actually, I would say there's always a pithy quote on LinkedIn or kind of someone standing on a stage with a bit of a soundbite. Yes. I think it's peeling that back and going, but actually, what would that look like? Does that really mean anything? Yeah. And I think that genuine advice is that stuff that kind of stays with you throughout your career, and you've got those reference points that you go back to.
I mean, just to pick up on that, one of my first jobs, I was working in John Lewis at the time, and we had a library of books, of HR books, and I just picked them up and read them, assuming they were all correct, all out. And that, boy, was I wrong. And it wasn't until later in my career I thought, my goodness, some of that stuff, just you need to really reflect about what you're actually reading.
I was given a bit of a dodgy HR book as well. Actually, now you say that quite early on. It's sort of read this, but actually you realise a lot of it is about through lived experience, isn't it? And completely. Reflecting on it and just trying to get better all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's when you start reading enough of them that you realise they all disagree with each other. That you go, right, that makes sense and that makes sense, but they can't both be true. Yeah. That's where it gets a bit tricky. For everything we discussed today, as usual, we'll be talking about the general principles of what's happened. So we're not picking on any individual organisation. We know your jobs are complex, so we will talk at a level of detail that makes sense for that kind of conversation. But we're going to kick off this episode by acknowledging a tragic anniversary, which is in and around when you'll be listening to this. It's likely to be 5 years since the first COVID-19 lockdown was announced in the UK, but obviously that was a part of a broader worldwide pandemic. It was an incredibly challenging time for everyone, inside and outside of work, but it obviously had massive impacts on the world of work and the economy, and those are still felt to this day. It was a trigger for a lot of change, and we wanted to have a bit of a conversation around what is that lasting impact on the profession and working practices. So if I come to you first for your reflections.
Yeah, I just want to start off by saying I think everybody listening, and probably the three of us, had our own unique experiences through COVID, and I loved every second of it. it was the hardest I'd ever worked in my career, but professionally and personally, it changed my life forever, which sounds very dramatic. I'm not a dramatic person, but it was so profound. I actually changed sector for the first time in 30 years, and it's just had the most amazing impact on myself, my family, my learning. But back to 5 years ago, first of all, it seems to have gone in a flash. When you said that, I was like, oh, surely not. But for me, it was so amazing as an HR person to be right there, almost leading the day to day, sort of coming to work in the morning, trying to get an understanding of what we needed to do that day as we got ready to close our business down. And then, of course, by lunchtime, it had changed. So you had to regroup and start again. But I really loved immediately being involved in that strategic direction of the day-to-day business, and that's where we should have been. We work with people, it's all about people, and I love that I've sort of stayed in that space. I feel even more than I did before the pandemic happened, that I'm now hugely responsible for the strategic direction of the business that I work in.
I've genuinely never heard that time described in such a positive way. Possibly because it's so completely wrapped up with such negative outcomes for so many people, but it obviously has had so really profound impact on your career. You can see a kind of different pathway that you're able to take because of it.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to caveat what I said at the beginning, knowing that many people didn't have that experience. That's how I genuinely feel.
No one would want you to have a worse experience. I think, in fairness, it's a difficult balance, isn't it? Because it's such a sensitive subject. But actually, there was obviously at that time, I think, a really significant shift in the accountabilities for the profession.
Yes.
In many organisations, the expectation. And with that, actually, quite often came a recognition that these things matter. You know, if we're going to do rapid change, that matters. There's a degree of expertise that sits behind the work the profession does. And actually, you know, in the UK, we were getting quite often changes to the terms on which we can employ people, things like furlough, on a Friday evening. That seemed to be the best point for the government to announce a change. The profound impact of people's employment was about 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. But then that meant people were looking to us for answers, and it again brought that technical capability into the spotlight. So can absolutely appreciate what you're saying. As you say, I'm sort of glad that you were able to discuss that. You know, you look back at it in a slightly different lens to know how many were.
I was freelance up until the beginning of the year and joined a new business this in February 2020. And suddenly, within a month, everyone's looking at me for the answers. It was an extraordinary situation. And did I have all the answers on tap? No, I didn't. Yes, it was one of the greatest learning experiences I've ever had. I wouldn't quite say it was quite as wonderful in some challenges we had. I mean, I became acting COO of the business as well as Director of People and Culture in my previous business. And what I will say is the most important thing that came out of that, and the reason probably why I'm sitting here, is the HR leadership community coming together. It was absolutely brilliant because, and it was also brilliant simply to know that most people said, I don't know, but I'll try and find out. And we were, you know, constantly scrambling for information. I think that was a breath of fresh air, and I think that was the power in your peer group is so critically important, and I think that's the best thing that came out of it.
Yeah, and I know many of those relationships have endured as well. So, you know, that, again, an inflection point. What about changes in the world of work? So I think there's a couple of observations I'll make. One is that there's just a long-term scarring, psychological in some cases, health-wise in others, but also economic. And those changes kind of impact the way that we operate today. But there have also been changes in working practices for many, changes in expectations around what people may expect from their employer. To what extent do you think those changes have been for the better?
For me, a lot of it is about what the employees want from us as an employer, and the line has become and remains still very, very blurred, I think, between home and work. There's huge expectations on support for well-being, mental health, childcare issues, hours of work, what they have to eat when they come to work, in my case. And honestly, I love it all. I think COVID really took us back to the sort of welfare part of what HR or people and culture did. And for me, that's remained. But I think that's how it should be. actually we're being pulled in so many directions now. Now we're expected to stay at the strategic front of the business, which I think we all love to do, but still we've got to keep an eye on the welfare. And I think it's just widened the spectrum of things that we do in people and culture, which if you're someone like me that gets bored very easily, it's just a great opportunity to look at every facet of work.
Definitely. I think the interesting thing I'm starting to see is people coming into the workforce who were at school or weren't at school during COVID, and the expectations are completely different to what they haven't really fully experienced what a workplace was before all this. And I think there's a different expectations of how they interact with people, what is on tap for people, what's available for people. And I think there's been a fundamental shift in, from a hospitality background. All you have to do is go to central London on a Thursday evening. You'll see pubs that packed between 6 and 8:30, and then suddenly no one there. Mm-hmm. And then very quiet on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's totally transformed London. And I'm sure it has, cities and towns across the UK. Because there's a different thought process about, how people see hospitality in itself. But in terms of the workplace, there are different challenges, particularly with well-being. There's a lot more thought process we have to put into how does this affect someone wider than just the workplace itself when we make a change.
Yeah, and it's reconciling that with the performance challenge, the economic challenges as well, isn't it? And I think that's where organisations are increasingly feeling pressure from a number of different sources, because it still needs to add up. There's a reason that people are paid to work, and that's to deliver an outcome. And it's making sure that actually, as you say, that welfare piece is an enabler to that rather than that being a trade-off.
And I think we were talking a little bit about retention before we came in, and I think people, if it's not ticking boxes for them, they just leave because they know they can maybe go and try another employer where they could get where they want what they want. Sorry, I think that's huge. I've never seen retention. I just have so many conversations now about retention and how can we do better, because a lot of it, of course, now is to do with cost of living. So even for a small increase in an hourly rate, someone who's supporting a family, they'll move on. But it's the younger generation, as you were just referencing, that they'll just go somewhere else,
which is a challenge. That was obviously a worldwide crisis. Occasionally, organisations have a crisis that impacts them in particular. And seemingly, Gareth and I were talking about this earlier, seemingly it happens when Gareth comes on a podcast.
My fault.
I'm not saying there's an established cause and effect. I'm just saying that last time you were on, we had...
Microsoft thing, what was it called? I can't remember what it was.
It was essentially lots of... there was a worldwide cybersecurity
thing, wasn't it?
Wasn't there? And it took down large chunks of services across. Today... on the day that we're filming this, we're probably about 30 minutes drive from Heathrow, and Heathrow, one of the world's biggest airports, is shut for the day due to an electrical fire. And Gareth, I know you spent some of your morning having to deal with that.
Yes, yeah. So I think, there are internal crisis and external crisis. And actually the other thing is, the way I look at it, there are real crises, which is COVID, and there are smaller things that affect things in a shorter space of time that you have to react to. And I think one of the key things is about that flexibility and ability to be agile with some of these issues, and also having that experience on tap and that knowledge of here's how we deal with it. But once you've dealt with it, reviewing it and thinking very carefully about actually how do we avoid this happening again, or not avoid it happening again sometimes, but what processes do we need to put in place if it does happen again? I've dealt with situations where we've taken on a business, and that business, there were a lot more problems with it than we realised. And the challenge is, okay, well, we've done that. We've gone down that road. We've realised there were lots of issues and lots of problems. What do we put in place so we can actually assess it better before we take on something like this?
I think all three of us, we were chatting earlier, and I'm not going to ask you to name names, but all three of us have worked for organisations historically that have been in a negative media spotlight. So prominent people go, oh, you work for them. And that's a difficult thing to handle when so much of the job is trying to make people feel proud about the organisation, confident in the direction of the organisation, wanting to contribute. How do you deal with that? So, your organisation is either locally, nationally, internationally in the spotlight for the wrong things. What do you do to help guide people through that?
It's often employees and how they feel about work that will pull a company out of a crisis successfully. And leadership, Gareth, like you this morning, it's leadership that I think have got to put plans in place and act fast, because it's the frontline workers that have got to deal with the actual crisis itself. So I think acting fast, being as transparent as possible, communication, giving as much information, I think all of those things can lead to harnessing the employee group to think, okay, right, we now understand what we've got to do, and we're going to go and do it. So it's sort of rallying the troops, as you might say. But yeah, the funny thing is, it's the employees that will pull the company through. So it's critical to make sure that they've got all the information that they need, and feel motivated to work towards a successful outcome. Yeah,
and that you're filling some of those gaps as well, because I think we talk about what you communicate, actually being really clear about what you can't communicate, we don't know.
Yeah.
Or, like, please don't speculate on this because it will be unhelpful, because that's where it tends to go a bit wrong, doesn't it, when the rumours start?
Yeah, I really, Gareth, I love what you said when we were talking about the COVID crisis, that often we had to say, listen, we don't know, we don't know, and actually that's okay, because we're going to find out, and we'll come back to you. Yeah. And I think it is literally, I feel so confident saying that now in the workplace, and your example is so great, letting employees know, but actually you're quite right, because customers potentially will want to pull you into a bit of a speculation about what's going on. It's just not helpful, is it, for anybody?
No, and it's that two-way piece, isn't it? Which is, you're trying to be as open as you can with people, but actually setting some requirements at that point. Like, please don't go away from this room and speculate about things. Yes. Yeah. We don't know. The information isn't available. So actually, if we can just get back and start focusing, that, to your point, is going to be the best thing for the organisation.
And that brings me back to COVID, because I remember having to sit down with every single team, some in person, as we were closing down the office, saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but here's what I know. And I was supporting the CEO and the CFO in some of those conversations, because they didn't know. I was trying to guide them into what to say and what shouldn't leave the room at that point. And those are really critical conversations to have. But I think the culture of the business, what's underlying with the culture, if you've got a strong enough culture within the business and people are behind that, and even, will accept there are bumps in the road and there are problems that come up, then you can get your way through it. If you don't have that culture, if you don't have a supportive, psychologically safe culture, it's very difficult.
And HR's got a really interesting role to play, and I mean that when I say HR, I mean the breadth of the people that might work within the profession, because I think, for whatever reason, we are always expected to toe the corporate line, probably a bit more than other colleagues, and that means that every person who's working, whether they're a sole practitioner in an organisation or whether you're part of a broader team but you're not the most senior person, I think the messages that we send are amplified. Yeah. So particularly if it reaches the point where people are concerned about, say, the existence of the ongoing viability of the organisation, they're looking for cues from the people that they think might be making them redundant.
I tend to be certain during COVID we'd be fine.
Yeah.
I was putting on a bit of an act because I just didn't know. I didn't know, but I had to play that part, and I think sometimes you do. You
have to, because the employees are watching facial expressions, body language. But I think the positive that's come out of that since COVID is now that we can influence the narrative as the people person, with the people in mind. I was just thinking, actually, I've had to do something like that this week, and I didn't even reflect on it. But that's been a great legacy from COVID, is that we're now expected to control the narrative, and I really love that, because we've got the culture at the forefront of our minds and the people, and that's almost a given now, which is really wonderful.
So, we've talked about people. People are traditionally human beings, but traditionally. But we want to talk now about that kind of overlap between the roles that we would have expected people to do historically and the capability of AI. So we're talking about the rise of the Coachbot. So that's the idea of AI chatbots, which can offer some form of workplace guidance, or even in some cases, suggested mentor people. There are quite a few products on the market. Some of them are mass market, so some of the biggest names in the world provide them. Career guidance being a kind of area that's quite popular, and using AI to help role play that and play different roles within that conversation. Can artificial intelligence really replace, if we focus in on mentoring, can artificial intelligence really replace the role of a mentor for your career?
What I can say about AI and technologies, I think broadly there is some positives with this. And I think actually having a different way of accessing this information, if it is accessible to everyone, is fine. If it's only accessible to the very top, then it's a different story. It depends what you're trying to achieve. So, with AI, it doesn't necessarily give you all the answers, but it gives you a starting point. So actually, if you're looking for some advice in terms of where you want to take your career or what you want to do, AI might be able to help you with a bit of guidance as far as that. But the human touch is really, really critical. And I think having been a mentor myself in the past, being able to actually listen to what someone's, not just what someone's saying, but what's underlying within that, I think is the critical bit that AI wouldn't be able to pick up. What really is going on with that person? Where do they really see themselves? Are they willing to put the effort in and not just saying it? Because actually with AI, it won't necessarily pick up those sort of things. But I think I'm not, a complete skeptic about AI. I think ultimately it is a tool that can help you and support you. But I don't think it's the be-all and end-all.
But you think there's opportunity in there? And
I think it's a starting point. Yeah, I don't think it's problematic to think actually that AI can help you. I mean, I was at a conference the other day, and an HR leader was talking about that they were using AI for role play, helping people to
workplace role play.
Yes, just to be very clear. Just to be very clear. Workplace role.
All adults.
Yes.
Phew,
Nothing.
okay.
Yes. Yes. It wasn't that kind of conference. And ultimately, they said it really helped people because people can sometimes feel strained in opening up to someone. As a person, whereas actually with that situation, they could be themselves and felt a bit more, felt as if they could just talk.
I guess I wasn't expressing surprise at anything apart from the fact that quite often people fall one side or the other on this. So they either go, yes, it's brilliant, it's going to take over the world and you do everything that we do, or they go, this is the worst thing ever, it should never go anywhere near that. So just here you go, look, there's some value in this, and we need to understand that. It feels like a good place to be.
I do think AI is enormously overhyped, and I've said that before in different situations. But it does have a use, and it has. It's the way I see it is at the moment, in particular, where it is a starting point rather than an end point.
I agree. I'm definitely in the middle. It's definitely got its place. I love the sort of real-time aspect of it, and also the fact that sometimes mentoring is only available to maybe senior people within a business, but with the Coachbot, it could be available for everybody. As I say, I like the real-time nature of it. I've looked at a system actually for where I work now, and thinking with retention in mind, it's that real-time reassurance when you're brand new and you can't remember the way down to your locker or what policies you're supposed to be reading that day. And it's really clever, and you can make it sort of speak in your own culture and your own language. Managers, I think, are spread so thinly nowadays. Having the opportunity to interact with a Coachbot could really help an employee feel more comfortable coming into work. But back to your question, I think mentorship, you're absolutely right. It needs that human element to it. Otherwise, I really disagree that a Coachbot could mentor.
It feels really odd, doesn't it? If someone said, who mentored you throughout your career, and you went, it was version 2.3 of that software. It hasn't got the same resonance, because I guess the other thing that I think you quite often tend to get from mentors is they tend to make connections for you.
Yes.
Or ease. Yeah. So you've got that role of mentor, and you've kind of got that overlapping role of kind of patron, which is they're going to be patronage and support or connect or introduce. And I think that's something that you also tend to get with kind of human beings. But yes, you did both take the same nuanced position, which means we'll have to edit that out.
I'm sorry.
It's too much sense being spoken here this morning.
Just to reflect back to what we've been talking about, if AI had been available during COVID and there were moments where I would have loved to have asked a question, rather than thinking, I have to wait for someone to respond, or about certain issues that, not entirely relying on the information that comes out of AI, but, it would help in those sort of situations. I think when you're talking about in the moment, I think that's the really critical bit. My experience of mentoring is you have to book in meetings that could be weeks in advance, and actually sometimes you need a bit of advice there and then.
So I'm going to give the CIPD a bit of a plug, which I think I'm okay to do because it's our podcast. There's a couple of things I'd like to kind of plug through here. One is we are currently in pilot with, and we think we've got a way to step up the effectiveness of our AI chatbot that will provide people with access to our resources in that kind of instant way. And we're also making our resources more practical. So I'm hoping you can ask some really practical how do I questions, and you'll get that information. It will just sit in the bottom of your laptop or your phone, whatever you need it, and it'll be there. I'm really excited about the potential of that. That said, the limit to that will be, I don't think it replaces the capability and the experience of all the people around you. And then the other thing that I'll kind of flag up is we do also have, because we launched at tail end of last year, a new mentoring platform. So if you are interested in giving people a bit of human guidance, please do sign up as a mentor. But equally, if you're interested in getting guidance from a proper human being, please go have a look at the platform as a mentee. We know it's been a often requested kind of feature or provision that we could make for people. Equally, we know that communicating that to people can quite often be challenging. So the most frustrating bit of my job is people going, if only you did this. And I'm like, we've got 3 of them. And so I'm plugging these really overtly. Check out what we do kind of around that AI solution over the next few months. But also, if you are interested in mentoring or being a mentee, then please do check that out as well. Right. We have just enough time to do our final section, which is always, as always, is it a thing? Is it a thing? Is it a thing? Is it a thing? And that tune is totally my own, in no way ripped off from an 80s game show. So in Is It a Thing, we look at a buzzword or something that's been in the media, and essentially we say, is it a real thing? Is this happening? Is it something people should be paying attention to? This week, I was asked to comment by a national broadsheet in the UK on gentle leadership and gentle management. So that's a leadership approach which prioritises empathy, emotional intelligence, and a people-centric mindset. It focuses on leading with kindness, respect, and understanding, whilst maintaining clarity, decisiveness, and effectiveness. Is this a new thing? Is this a new, is this a revelation? I didn't know what existed there, or is it just, well, yes, that's what you'd always aim to do. And actually, is gentle and hard, is that the right way for us to be talking about leading
it's like
people?
soft and hard skills and things like that. Yeah. So it's going back to that. I've got an interesting spin on this.
Super gentle.
The name Gareth in Welsh, one of the possible interpretations of that is gentle. So, gentle leadership might be something. My name's all over this.
You think it's named after
I don't think it's named after me in any way, shape or form.
It's a big claim.
It's a big claim.
Big claim from Gareth.
No, but Gareth's maybe.
Does someone owe you money for this? Is that the way?
But, is it just, as to quote Alan Partridge, it's just been rebadged? And I think probably it has been rebadged from something else. And the thing about these sort of concepts is, yes, it's a great idea and a great thought process, but also what situation you're in. We've been talking about crisis. Actually, is it, can you always have to, are you able to think in that way when you're leading through a crisis or in that moment of crisis? The way I always think back to is if the building's on fire, you don't say, oh, how do you feel about this? You just tell people to get out of the building. So while it's a really good idea in terms of the concepts behind it, actually that doesn't work at all times in all situations. And I think actually being flexible with how you approach a situation is a really critical bit of leadership. But as an overall concept, there are some great things about this.
I'm learning Welsh at the moment. I'm struggling. It's a very difficult
Gareth
language to learn, but I
gentle.
I'm enjoying it. What are your thoughts? Gentle, hard, somewhere in the middle?
Well, I don't know what Emma means, is what I was thinking. Sorry.
Sorry, in terms of your name or just general?
Exactly.
I don't know what I'm saying here.
We don't have time to cover all of that, but maybe in another episode. So I love this concept, but I have issues with the word gentle. I think the connotations around gentler, that it's soft, as you said, or maybe weak at worst, and it's really not. It's about, as you say, emotional intelligence. Employees want to be listened to and they want to be heard. Of course, there are moments in businesses that dictate a different style of leadership, and I think this is what we all should be working towards. Adult to adult, two-way conversations, listening, feeling heard. I think there are some sectors that since the pandemic have probably gone back to their very traditional model of leadership. It's such a shame, but for me this is everything, and it's kind of nice that it's come at the end of the conversation about COVID, because surely this should be one of the really great legacies of the pandemic.
I can tell you what I said, which was actually very similar to Gareth. It's contextual. Leadership is contextual. How do you get the best out of a group of people? How do you help them flourish? How do you help them deliver? How do you help get good outcomes for an organisation? And the consistent labelling of things as though it's a new thing is just really unhelpful, because what you want is people intelligently solving for.
Yes.
What do I need to do now? What do I need to do to help this person's career arc versus what do I need to do to help this person perform now? There might be very different styles required for those two things. So is it a thing in and of itself? No. Is it really important, to your point, that people are consistently mindful actually about how they're turning up, how they're delivering, what outcomes they're driving for, and how they're doing that through people? That's at the heart of the job and the profession.
Yes.
Excellent. So that's all from us for today. I'd like to thank both of our guests for coming to see us in the midst of another crisis. We've got a wealth of resources as ever available, and it's probably worth highlighting just a couple. We've done, for the first 2 months of this year, we did a really big focus on AI. So we've got all of our resources available there, and you can look at the impact on your role and the workplace. And secondly, we've got a quiz available to find out about how your management approach aligns to behaviours that support health, wellbeing and engagement outcomes. But we'll continue to focus in our work on how do you drive those positive outputs. We publish new episodes of this every fortnight, so do make sure that you follow or subscribe. You found us at least once if you managed to get to this part of it. My name's David D'Souza, and this has been the HR People Pod. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are you saying thank you at the end?
Thank you.
I feel we need to leave this bit in.